This short video explanation that goes with Chapter 37 assignment. Chapter 37 assignment is 1952 to 1960, kind of dealing with Eisenhower. This is a fun chapter dealing with kind of the pop culture of the 1950s, the roaring 50s. So some videos and some images here, all in the public domain. Please don't hesitate to call or give me an email if you have any questions. Again, this is Chapter 37. 1952 to 1960. And so the textbook, at least in the 15th edition, goes from page 860 to 888. We're going to cover 1952 to 1960, and most of this is kind of the pop culture. Thank you, and we will begin. The start of Chapter 37 here, we're going to be talking about the introduction of computers into the private sector. Number 3 here, the computer giant IBM. Computers were introduced into the military during World War II and as code breakers, but they were released into the private sector shortly after World War II. IBM was prominent in that. If you look here, consumer culture of the 1950s, question number 9. The blossoming consumer culture. It talks about McDonald's, Disneyland, other kind of pop culture sensations. The introduction of TV stations in 1946, but 442 stations a decade later by 1956. And so just this idea of more of a mobile society with the introduction of the interstate highway system, and also the consumer culture, introduction of McDonald's and TV. This video, this little clip here, this image here, if you have the PDF copy, you can click on this. It's a short little video clip of Ozzie and Harriet, one of the more popular shows of the 1950s. I Love Lucy was probably the most popular, debuting in the 1950s, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Of course, we then also have the introduction of Elvis and the King, and so Elvis is the 1950s, the King with a fleshy face, pouting lips, and antic. And so that's, if you again click on this image, you can go to a short video clip on YouTube. Also then we have the introduction of TV within political races, and the first presidential campaign to use TV was Eisenhower, and this is a famous campaign commercial for Eisenhower in the election in 1952. Now, with all of that, there's also then number 25, this introduction, or 24, this introduction of McCarthyism and this anti-communist hysteria. So, McCarthyism, Senator Joe McCarthy was definitely a communist hunter, and he is called out in the United States Senate for using definitely some harsh measures. So let's watch this. McCarthy was popular for a while, but the fall of Joseph McCarthy as Joseph Wealth kind of takes him to task, and it's on YouTube here. This is a video of that, and you can watch, or you can read this. This is exactly what he says, Joe McCarthy and Joseph Welch. Let's see if this works.
Until this moment, Senator, I think I never really gauged your cruelty or your recklessness. If it were in my power to forgive you for your reckless cruelty, I would do so. I like to think I'm a gentleman. But your forgiveness will have to come from someone other than me.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. May I say that Mr. Welch talks about this being cruel and reckless. He was just baiting. He has been baiting.
Senator, may we not drop this? Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
I know this hurts you, Mr. Welch.
I'll say it hurts.
May I say, Mr. Chairman, as a point of personal privilege, I'd like to...
So that's a famous video clip. Let's see, I'm trying to get rid of this. It's a famous video clip in American history for Senator Joseph McCarthy. And so let's read a little bit about him, the rise and fall of Senator Joseph McCarthy. As you move forward into question 27, we're going to look on page 867 in Desegregating African American Society, the late 50s, middle into late 50s. Emmett Till comes on to stage. We will be asking you to do an assignment later on, Eyes on the Prize, a video segment dealing exclusively with civil rights. But I wanted to spend just about 10 questions here, starting on page 867 in your textbook, looking at the NAACP and looking at other discrimination practices of the South. We also then have the introduction of Thurgood Marshall. He is the leading lawyer for the NAACP. Eventually, Thurgood Marshall receives nomination onto the Supreme Court and becomes the first African American on the Supreme Court. So just, I guess there's closer to 15 or so questions here, just dealing with page 867, 868, and the seeds of civil rights revolution. Brown versus Board of Education is 1954, although those events occur in the 50s when Eisenhower is in office. It kind of comes to head in the 60s when Kennedy and then when Johnson becomes president, but it's all introduced in a post-World War II atmosphere, early to mid-1950s. And then as you get into page 874, we also then have the introduction of the Vietnam nightmare, and Ho Chi Minh. Here's a picture of Ho Chi Minh, the leader of the Communist Vietnam, the Communist Vietnam forces, and the takeover. We have various battles that occur. We have a battle way up north, that is the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and then tons of events that we'll be looking at again in a chapter exclusively about Vietnam. It starts in the 50s, but it really starts to escalate when Johnson becomes president in the middle of the 1960s. So, of course, then back to Eisenhower. Eisenhower runs for re-election in 1956, but the chapter that we're dealing with here almost exclusively deals with the 50s, but it introduces civil rights and it introduces Vietnam, because that's kind of where those two themes, those two watersheds in American history begin. As you get into question 57, we have ICBM, that's the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, and then NASA. So we have the introduction of some missiles and space initiative into the Cold War. And then on page 878 we have then the introduction of, well, first of all, Castro. Cuba's Castroism spells communism. This is at the very, very end of Eisenhower's administration, and then that brings into place the Kennedy administration. So Kennedy challenges Nixon for the presidency. Nixon, of course, Eisenhower's vice president. Nixon's vice president, or Eisenhower's vice president Nixon, is challenged then by the Democrat Kennedy, and that's in the next chapter. And then one other thing that occurs that begins in the 1950s is this idea of using television in presidential elections, and we'll look at it in the next chapter, but Eisenhower was the first presidential candidate to use television commercials to run for president, and then these two candidates, as they run against each other, this is the first presidential election in which there is a televised presidential debate, and so we'll look at that a little bit closer when we talk about Kennedy. In addition to the questions from Chapter 37 out of the textbook, I'd like you to take a look at several of these video clips. These can all be found on YouTube. This is kind of numerous clips taken from Volume 4 of The Century, America's Time, and this is 1953 to 1960, but various video clips from pop culture. They can be found on YouTube, or you can either follow these links. You can follow these links, or you can take your QR code scanner. These should work. They should go directly to these short videos. So, for instance, this first one is about 2 minutes. Watch the 2-minute video and answer these questions, and then go to the next one about cars of the 1950s. It's about 3.5 minutes. Either click this link or go with your QR scanner here. And this is a 3-minute video. Answer these 7 questions. Pretty self-explanatory, but please finish up this. And then at the end, this is you should be able to click this link, or just go to YouTube and look up I Love Lucy and watch some episodes from I Love Lucy. That concludes the assignments for Chapter 37 video explanations. Please don't hesitate to give me a call or an email if you have any questions regarding this. All images within this presentation are in the public domain. Thank you.